Okay, so apparently we're live. I don't know whether we've got any viewers. In fact, I do know we haven't got any viewers, but it's just gone live now. I don't expect to see many. I mean, this is, after all, basically an internal chat between four people talking about online communities to prepare for a conference workshop. But we just thought we would make it public so that we could publish the video later in order to stimulate an exchange, because in our view, at least in my view, speaking for myself, just turning up to a conference and speaking for 45 minutes or 90 minutes isn't really as good as you can do it. You know, one can provide a lot more value by having a conversation about the conference beforehand and then afterwards, allowing people to engage with the content, ask questions before and after. So if you're watching this live, you know that you can ask questions via Twitter. Don't use the Q&A app in Google+. It would be too much work for us to try to follow it in different conversations. Just use Twitter. So I'll start with tour de table here. Let's start with the lady, Liz Copeland. Please, quick introduction.
Yep, I'm Liz Copeland. I work on the Knowledge Hub, digital collaboration platform for public service. And really my role is to sort of support engagement and to look after a lot of our customers and to engage with them, to support them in running their groups and running their communities.
Okay, great. We'll get back to Knowledge Hub a bit later. Michael Norton?
Yeah, I'm Michael Norton. I'm the Digital Community and Knowledge Manager. I've actually been there from the very, very start, so back in sort of 2004, 2005, so I've been there through sort of a whole sort of lifespan of different online communities and where we come from and where we are now.
Okay, great. And Steve Clift?
And great, I'm Steve Clift, and I'm the new global engagement lead with the Knowledge Hub. I'll have two hats on at the EuroPCom conference. I also am the executive director of eDemocracy, so I have I've had a government by day and citizen by night career of being involved with online engagement in many ways.
Okay, so just for the people who are watching it live or watching it later, Steve and I are two of the four speakers at a workshop I'm organizing on online communities at the EuroPCom conference. And so we thought it would be useful to quiz Liz and Michael a little bit more to get some knowledge from them about online communities in preparation for our workshop. We've created a group on Knowledge Hub, which is this platform that Liz mentioned earlier, where these three sterling people are all involved in one way or another. So you'll find a lot more content there. So, great. Let's just get started. What I'll do is I'll start by asking Steve a question, and then the other two can chime in, and then we'll take turns like that. Steve, very quickly, what is an online community, and what does it offer public communicators? And when I say communicators, I mean in a very broad sense, you know, the public sector, so to speak.
Well, I mean, the simple way to look at an online community is imagine that we're all sitting around a table and we are able to communicate as a group. But instead of having to be face-to-face, we are virtual to virtual, if you will, computer to computer. But ultimately, it's about people in a community using online tools to communicate, from forums to chats to even video and teleconferences. There's different technologies you can use to connect people to exchange ideas, questions and answers, to share information. And it goes way back to some of the beginnings of the internet when people realized that we could communicate in groups rather than just one way online.
Mm-hmm. And from the point of view of a public sector communicator, somebody who wants to get a message out, what is an online, creating an online community is a fair bit of work, let's face it. But what are the advantages, what are the unique advantages of doing that?
Well, online communities have a different frame than, say, a Facebook page or a Twitter account. So many public communicators may have a marketing hat on and think about how do you let someone know about responses to flooding or to various emergency management type communication, which typically is one-to-many blasted out. An online community is more about how do you engage stakeholders in your community or stakeholders within your government organization or across government organizations. Knowledge Hub specializes in public sector, a lot of intergovernmental communication, things that happen across governments, doing similar things, people who are professionals sharing knowledge. But if you're thinking about like public communicators going with the public, I think that's where you bring in that tier of stakeholder engagement, creating online spaces where people who are working in your community to address an issue, say for example, reducing homelessness or dealing with various public services that maybe the government funds, but you have civil community sector organizations that are helping you execute that. You could create online spaces where you trade knowledge and information, and you often will try to get the people who are doing the work to talk to each other and help each other out along the way.
Okay, okay. So, Liz, Michael, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of talk about it. I mean, when we first started off in our previous organisations, the idea of our organisation was to be there as a knowledge broker to support local government improvement, and the idea of community practice come out of it. So a lot of the work that we do is more the organisation to organisation element, encouraging to share and learn from each other, because with resources being cut, and we need to find new ways of working and also make sure that we can learn from each other rather than making the same mistakes over and over. So we're taking sort of like the original concept of community practice and put them into more of a virtual element, but then started encouraging other parts of it, like by bringing knowledge management techniques and sharing techniques into it. And over the last sort of few years also like bringing some of the social science elements into it as well, where people, how do we get people engaged? How do you get people to share with each other? How do you get people to take that stuff off and actually go and use it? So that's very much what we've been trying to do around our communities as well.
Right. Okay. Now I need to somehow, when somebody speaks, I need to bring you into the top of the picture. I'm not quite sure.
So just click on their picture.
Yeah, I thought I did.
Normally it just changes automatically.
I thought it would change automatically. Yeah.
Normally it does, yeah. But for whatever reason it's not. So.
I must have a setting wrong. Sorry, yeah, sorry, Michael. You were speaking as a very small man, but it was a very big idea. So, we'll come back to the origins of local government, but before we, in the origins of Knowledge Hub in the Local Government Association, which I think is really unique and fascinating. But before that, just to Liz, you work with online communities within the platform, but what are the main use cases for an online community for a public sector organization?
Well, I think they can be far-reaching. Quite a lot of our communities are sort of large national communities of practice that have built up over quite a long amount of time, and they provide a range of different knowledge sharing support. So it could just be asking questions, problem solving, that side of things. It could be advice, peer-to-peer learning in that way, and it could be doing sort of peer assist, much more sort of formal type things as well within a sort of larger community. Equally, we do have some very small sort of time-based project management groups as well. So it can be, perhaps a 6-month project where you need to share sort of milestones and project documentation and that sort of thing. So there's quite a far-reaching load of uses for it. We actually did some sort of user research, sort of qualitative stuff, where we asked a number of our community members what they use the Knowledge Hub for and how they find it and what the benefits are and what they get out of it. And it seemed that there were around sort of 7 different types of use on the whole for Knowledge Hub groups. I've mentioned one which is like a community of interest or community of practice, and I've mentioned another which is sort of like a project group. Others were things like steering groups, recruitment campaigns, training programs, peer reviews I've mentioned, or just simply a discussion forum for supporting each other. So there's a whole range of different ways that you might use an online community to support you. Okay,
and this is, bring myself back here, this is always in the context of a public sector organization. Whereas if you go online looking for advice, how to set up, how to convene a community, how to get it started and do things, you quickly come across a lot of advice which is really written by and aimed at people who are managing online communities for public companies who are partly a marketing reasons to launch a community or build a community around your software product and so forth. So what are the key differences in approach between sort of online community management for a privately run company, a profit-driven place, and a public sector? Anybody? You can start.
I think that's quite an interesting
I'm taking notes.
question.
This is a great question. Notes on the panel.
So I think having seen some of these sort of private sector communities in action as well, you know, because actually the Knowledge Hub is open to anybody, and private sector organisations can also have communities on here. It's interesting what you mentioned about sort of developing products and that sort of thing, because actually some communities, private sector related communities, are often using this kind of stuff as a kind of customer tool in order to gain insight from customers about product development, and that's kind of how they use this kind of stuff, well, with their external stakeholders anyway.
But can I just come in there? Can I just come in there? Because governments also produce products, I mean, products and services,
yeah,
right?
Exactly,
and
but I suppose you term it consultation.
Yeah, that's participation, isn't it?
I think it's consultation, definitely. I think it's all to do with the language you use, because I think, you know, when you talk about product development in the private sector, it's quite different to consultation around products and services in the public sector, or that would be my understanding anyway. I would say public sector...
Go ahead.
Sorry, you were going to say?
No, I just misclicked.
I would say public sector communities are very much more based around a kind of shared requirement to do something. So, you know, a lot of, just going back to our history, for example, and I know you said you were going to go back there anyway, to the Local Government Association, and before that, you know, a lot of what this was about self-regulation, it was about self-improvement, it was about the fact that budgets were being cut left, right and centre, and actually, you know, there was a requirement to pool resources, to pool knowledge in order to improve and to be, you know, the best public service that you could be within these kind of constricted budgetary situations. Mm-hmm. And so that has been sort of the imperative behind some of the public service collaboration that's happened. Whereas I think there's much more of a commercial driver for some of the public sector, for some of the private sector communities.
Yeah.
One thing I would just add. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, one thing just to add is
I was just going to add.
Please, Liz. Yes, please. Go ahead, Liz.
That the good thing about something like Knowledge Hub, of course, is that you can overlap that. And actually, we do have public and private sector community members. And actually, there's an awful lot that both sectors can learn from each other. And so, in fact, actually, it's sort of breaking down perhaps some of those traditional silos and barriers, and actually including everybody in the conversation, because who's to say a private sector supplier doesn't have a really good idea, or who's to say that somebody in the public sector can't contribute really well to a private organisation. So you know, there are opportunities to break some of those silos down, I think.
Okay, great. Stephen, you wanted to say?
Well, I was going to endorse what you just said. Coming from, you know, both a government and a nonprofit perspective from my professional career, you know, it's about public services, and who delivers those services varies from country to country. Obviously, the Knowledge Hub was founded in the UK, is predominantly UK based, and my job is to help sort of introduce it into other countries. And the key for me is that how that openness can be structured such that people realize this is different than just sort of that intergovernmental email listserv, you know, of county attorneys that is very exclusive. This site allows, yes, for that same kind of a private space if that's exactly what you need, but also those tiers of access and connection. So what I was going to say before that was that you know, I find it really, really challenging when you begin shifting from sort of the niche online groups where, like, so you have a strong purpose, to sort of thematic groups at a global setting. So one of the things that I'm looking for input on from the team and in general is sort of like, what are timely themes and topics that would allow us to convene? And the reason to convene and share knowledge, say, about, say, climate change adaptation, right, by local government, as an example, is that a good idea in one government can be shared with another government or another community, and no one loses on that, right? You know, and so the incentive to share is much stronger with public service-oriented online communities.
Yeah, I was going to add to that as well. I mean, to go back to your original part of the question, that very difference between the public sector and private sector stuff, and just what we've been looking to do is that we're trying to be permeable, that the communities have the ability to see what other communities are pretty much up to and try and encourage that cross-fertilisation, or technically be like a bumblebee going out and cross-pollinating other communities by sharing what we do with different places. So it could be a good idea in one particular area which most people would never even bother even think about trying to transfer into a completely different sector or a different area of work. And because we're enabling people just to talk and have that conversation and sort of break down that context as well, they can actually try those different ideas out. The other bit you mentioned right at the start as well, Matthew, is that you said about there's a lot of stuff written about building communities out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we've actually gone down the route of we know how to build communities. That's great, but how do you actually sustain them? And there's not much written around that. And so we've done a lot of stuff around how do you actually sustain a community, because so many communities kickstart, go very, very well. Then there's this idea of called the trough of sorrow, where most communities fall in after sort of like the first part of their sort of like life, and they then crash and burn very, very quickly. And we're saying, well, we don't want that to happen. How can we support you to keep your communities ticking over so they can actually fulfil their need of the membership? So they've got the what's in it for them, but something comes out of it at the end. It's not one person's idea. It's a group of people's ideas coming together. They do what they need to do. Some will last for a long time, some will last for a short amount of time, but they actually go away with something at the end, rather than just a range of documentation that gets dumped onto a lot of community sites and no one ever comes back to.
Right.
Can I ask a question with Michael? Michael, so what you're saying is that it isn't just about technology, and so I'm just curious, how do you explain to someone the onboarding process? So you want to create a group, but I mean, do they just do it on their own, or do you have a support mechanism, or do we?
Yeah, I mean, we've been running I've been running a community for 10 years now for online facilitators, and the idea behind that was to support anyone looking to run their own community. And I mean, we've learned an awful lot. We're still learning. We're always going to be learning because things are always changing. There's so many different new skills that you can add into this. And it's probably one of those. I mean, like there's a guy called Dion Hinchcliffe who wrote a great article that a community manager is a jack of all trades, and you bring in lots of different subject areas. And some people are really, really good, and they're quite happy to share their experience with somebody else, so someone else can try it. And our community's been very much around that, sharing ideas, tips, us trying things out in a safe environment so that others can go and try it out. Because we know that every group's different. One idea might work really well in one group, but might not work so well in another group. But you've got to try it to find out if it works. And if it doesn't work, try something different. But if it does work, great, carry on that type of thing. You find out what they're actually looking to do and how they want to work. So that's what we've been doing sort of for the last 10 years. We've produced a whole range of our community's been running for that period of time. It's a huge amount of documentation and advice, guidance documents and training and support that we've provided. And we've got a whole range of real skilled facilitators that are quite happy to share ideas with other people. And I've had facilitators from my community go out and share to other community platforms and other people, other organisations, saying, "I'm go and speak to this person, they're very, very good at this." We've even run events in the past. We run one event where none of us did any presentations. It's all the community members talking to all the other community members about what they've done and how they work and what things work and what things didn't for them, which is quite unique in that way.
That's a sign of a very successful community, I would say, when the members of the community can actually take the lead, can take the podium and provide value without any intervention of the people who are supposedly, well, I wouldn't use the word managing, I think the correct word is to convene a community. Is that right? So this is interesting because you said something about maintaining a community. Steve, my opening slides for the EuroPCom conference, let me just bring myself up full screen because that's better. My opening slides I'll identify one key issue, which is how to kickstart a community, because often you know, it's almost impossible to get started sometimes when you think about it, because you need a core number of people there. But why would they join when there's no one there? You sort of get the chicken and egg situation. But it seems like it's a bit more complicated than, you know, if you can get off the out of the chicken and egg situation, it just goes exponentially upwards. According to Michael, there's a trough.
Yeah, well,
does that look a little bit like the Gartner hype cycle? You know, sort of. Do you know the Gartner hype cycle? It's a similar sort of thing, which goes up and then down and then goes up again. Is it something similar to that? And how? I mean, what should we focus on? Should we focus on getting people started or keeping them going? Because we haven't got all day for that session. What do you want to ask more about, I think? Do you want to start talking about the chicken and egg problem or the sustainability problem?
Well, one thing I'll say from my experience, It's shifting, though, because there's so much competition for our interactive attention with Facebook, Twitter, you name the tool, LinkedIn. But typically with an online group, you have this really exciting phase of introductions once you've done some good outreach, and then it's a lull. And I often talk about how do you, as a facilitator, intervene and introduce a topic that stops it from going too low. The other thing is when it starts, if it goes too high, right, or if there's too much volume, or if maybe this typically happens with some of the citizen-based forums that I do, like on politics and online town hall. It's different than government, but if you have a conflict of any kind or a technical problem, if it happens at the wrong point during the opening stage, it can really blow apart all the work you've done. And so paying attention to those first weeks as you unleash a forum or a group, and then also then paying attention to, okay, what are some of the interventions that I can do that are that don't turn people into direct consumers, and this is that other balancing point, right? So if you do too much, then they become consumers, and then it's dead, right? So
consumers, as in they're just reading your content.
They just read.
You're the community manager. I've got to get this community going. I've got to get this community going. So you're pumping out content, and people are going, "This is like television. This is fantastic. I love it." And they sit back and they don't make any contribution. Is that what you're saying?
It's basically, yeah. It's a balancing act. So.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, please, Liz.
Sorry, I was just going to say, in relation to that particular, to what you asked about, particularly in relation to this conference, it is partly going to depend on who you've got on the audience there, and whether they're used to this approach and this way of working or not. For, like you say, Steve, a lot of people are going to be used to kind of social media, Twitter, kind of, quick consumption of information, assimilating things quickly, perhaps. What they might not be used to is actually an in-depth, proper community that is a real good source of, somewhere to go when you've got a problem. The only place. I think a lot of the communities that work really well on the Knowledge Hub work well because they have a really, really clear purpose and focus. And for some people, it's a place they have to go every day because it helps them deliver their job, because a lot of these people are practitioners in public service, and so it's really, really useful for them in the particular context that they are in. And so I suppose in relation to this conference coming up, it's going to really depend on who the audience are as to what they're going to get out of or need from what you say. So some of them may be really unused to this way of working, in which case they need to know kind of how you get this stuff going. They might want that really big spike of people joining and that sort of stuff, because that might be the only thing that they, that might be the initial thing they need to know about. But at the end of the day, you're right, that maintaining and sustaining beyond that is the challenging part, but it's the part that a lot of communities do get wrong. So
let me answer that question.
It's a balance between the two, perhaps.
Let me answer that question because I wanted to bring this up, because EuroPCom is a conference about public communicators, and so at the beginning of this conversation, I pointed out that what are the benefits from the perspective of public communicators, but I asked you to stretch the definition. I'm not talking about just spin doctors or people who produce brochureware. The background to this is that this is not the first time I've done a workshop at this conference. I did one last year, and it was about participation. And one of the outcomes from that workshop, which was an open cafe thing, and I wasn't the only one there, by the way, I was one of two facilitators, and we had a couple of other facilitators as well. But one of the outcomes was that if you want to do a participation project and you don't really mean it, if you're not actually sincere, you're just seeing this as a communications project, you're trying to sell a government policy, but you're not really interested in what people are going to tell you, you're not really going to onboard their contribution, then you're going to basically shoot yourself in the head, because people are not stupid. They're going to realize that their contributions to this policy consultation or whatever are being dumped in a waste paper basket somewhere, though, and there's never any intention of taking them on board. And then it's going to be even harder for you to rebuild the trust later on. So that was participation, and this workshop is a bit of an outgrowth of that, in that for me, online communities in the public sector are very interesting from the perspective of participation. That's a community where there are some people from the government, from the public sector in the community, and there are many people from outside. Whereas what's interesting in Knowledge Hub is that you can have that sort of community. You can have people from inside the government or the public body and outside who are having a conversation about policy or implementation or whatever, or holes in the road. But you can also have purely internal communities for public servants to work together on a problem. It could be, how do you deal with radicalization of young men, or it could be, how do you deal with the fact that we've just had our budget cut by 20%, but we still have to fix that many roads, and how do we manage that? And that's what I think is quite interesting about that particular platform. That's why I've gotten involved in it.
So I got a story the other day, Matthew, in just a different way. One of the groups we've been working with, like Mike, who runs that, and it's around open data. And when open data started working, especially in government, the way you published it, it was in so many different formats, in so many different ways, and so many, just by bringing that community together, they've created a common language and a common way of working. Where it would have taken you probably 2 to 3 years of trying to do that, but because everyone come together and went, okay, let's try and create some standard, let's try and create a format that everyone can use and everyone understands, so that we can extract that data and use it in a nice format. And a lot of communities just sometimes have to come together just to create a common language, a common understanding. That's their simple purpose that they're there for. It could be a very simple task, but on paper it looks like a simple task, but in reality people know it's going to take a long time to actually bring that together.
I would say that it was a complicated task, but it was simple to define. This community has a simple purpose. We're going to try to figure out this problem, and this brings me to one of the points that we've discussed already on the wiki and in the forums, and that is, what are the key characteristics of a successful community? And one of them is purpose. Thank you.
Clear purpose.
Who wants to pick up on that?
Well, I wrote down five things that I thought were kind of key success factors, and I know Michael will probably have more than this. But here's my 5 things, I think. Number 1, clear purpose. Number 2, good leadership. And by that I mean kind of senior level support, good community management, that sort of thing. So leadership in the widest term there. Number 3, starting small, building from there, identifying your champions, encouraging your members, growing gradually. Number 4, specific and provocative discussions. So usually being more specific and more provocative is better than being general, because you're much more likely to provoke a better response.
Okay.
And number 5, interesting and valuable content at regular intervals.
Okay.
So Michael, you can probably build on that, I expect.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when you start, it's looking for some quick wins. I mean, the whole point is like it's what's in it for me, for the members. So quite often when we've had a chance to sort of work with some communities, we did a marketplace exercise really early on with them, saying what can you offer this community and what would you like to see from this community, what would you need from it. And the amount of times someone will say, oh, I need something on this, and someone else in that meeting will go, well, I've done that. Great, there we go, there's the content, there's the 2 people match you up, let's share that, and other people will go and use that and adapt it and then do it. The amount of times that people will adapt someone else's work and put it into their own organisation rather than bringing a consultant in, it's huge, but trying to actually get them to tell you the story and how much it saved them is the difficult part.
Yeah.
So you've got those ones, and the last one is, we talked watching Steve's hands earlier on, he was doing a little wave motion about how you'd get the community going up and down. A plan. So many facilitators run out of ideas because they front load. They think you have to stick all your documentation up in the first week or so, and no, you don't. You ask questions first. Get the group slowly working forward. Ask questions that you may already know the answer to, because someone else will then jump in and it starts getting that engagement, and you can slowly bring in new bits in all the time, and getting a good blend between the discussions, the events and activities you do, and then the content. So many go down the content route and wonder why everyone downloads it and never comes back. So Matthew mentioned, it's like watching TV. You get rid of the content, but you don't do anything with it. So discussions are the key part, and then it's the people part that's the key bit behind it as well.
And I'd like to add just a quick bit here. So that Liz's number 4 point about provocative questions. And one technique is, if you get questions, say offline, really direct that participant or that person to say, hey, could you ask that question in the group? And then we'll have the answer there. Or even as a facilitator, if you're trying to get a group going, basically go to some of your key people that you think will post first and say, could you come up with a question? Or, hey, I have these questions, would you mind asking this? And this is it's not skullduggery to sort of plant questions, but to get the conversation going. It really is an important technique to sort of to model how the space can be used early on. And so what people think of it as the go-to place where they save time. They save time by asking a question there. They often, maybe, and one technique also to teach them is to sort of say, let us know if you did a little bit of research first, maybe share a couple links to a few things you found, and then ask the question, what else am I missing? And that tends to motivate a lot more response because you've actually shown that you're putting a little bit into your research query. Other thing I just want to mention is a lesson that I've had, at least in the nonprofit world with online community building, is that momentum is more important than an instant success. Momentum, and that's that intervals of time, plotting out, when you might share things. And the other key thing is managing expectations. So a lot of people shoot to the moon, right? They get halfway and they feel like they failed. So really try to identify more of those incremental things to celebrate. So right now on Knowledge Hub Global, I invite anyone to join. Right, I have 35 people. My goal was 20 people to get on there to have a round of introductions. Now I started it at 30. Now I could say, my gosh, we blew past our goal of 20. Now just by being able to say that, right, it gives people a sense of momentum, right? And now I'm really working hard behind the scenes to get everyone, as many people as possible, to actually introduce themselves. And I'm doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? Because introductions are one of those things that people are willing to do who might not be willing to post otherwise, right? And it gets them, but once they do that, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad, because most people actually are quite shy about posting anything, speaking in public, posting in public, even if it's a private group, it's the same idea, right? So those are just
I'm sorry, Steve. I'm one of the guilty ones who hasn't introduced myself yet, so I will go and do it after this.
Great.
I was going to say, build on.
It's more to do with lack of time.
Build on sort of the purpose. I mean, what a lot of see a lot of purposes for communities coming through. Quite often they're quite woolly. They say this group is here to share knowledge on this. Well, that's okay, but really you need to be a bit more specific, and it may create some objectives to do it. So the ones that do have some sort of mini objectives behind the scenes are the ones that are really successful. I mean, one of the groups I've been working with for a long time is the project and program management community, and I mean, the long-term aim was always to get project and program management recognised as a profession in local government. And talking to the guy, I said I did it in 3 years. But originally, like I said, it might have taken 5 years. So without the community support, they wouldn't have done that. So that was always their long-term ambition. So they had a big objective. But from that, they've produced a range of content and guidance, which means they don't have to bring in consultants to do that. And they've rolled it out to other organisations, saving like thousands of pounds every time someone's using their methodology, because it was actually written by people doing the work to be shared with others to do the work, and then supported by other people that are doing the work.
Let me pull in a question from Anthony Lockett, or as he's known on Twitter as Tony L. Bruxelles, or BXL, at TONYLBXL. He asked on Twitter, what are the best incentives and rewards to get people to engage? So just to attach that question to what you were just saying, Michael, you've got these people who have worked together on a document which is going to benefit people they may never actually physically meet. What motivated them? You say, we're going to set up this group to do X, like figure out an open data language so we can talk, something quite precise and specific. But still, most people in life freeload. They're quite happy for other people to do the work and to take the benefit from it. And in an online community, you can definitely do that. So how do you make sure that you at least get that, the 9 out of the 99 breakdown of participation, you at least get 9% of people who actually produce something useful and benefit the other 90%.
I mean, for them, it was they worked in an area and they spoke to an awful lot of people, and that's what they felt the need was, to share, and they wanted to learn from each other. Different areas around the country are doing the site in different ways, and they wanted to get that consistency so that things could be more efficient, more effective. And I knew a lot of people would just go off and take it away and just go and use it, but because they had people who were facilitators from different regions, they knew about it, so they could bring those stories back. So a lot of people are quite happy to share because it's one of their core sort of values. If I can do something to share it, I'll do it. Where some of people don't do that. So a lot of it's down to the personality of the person.
It is a lot down to the personality. But imagine that you've got maybe you've got 3 types of people, and one of them is, I love sharing my work, I just do it, I'm altruistic, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the other person is, let those clowns do it, I'll just download it and use it, and I'll show it to my boss, and I'll pass it off as my own. And somewhere in, I'm simplifying a bit.
No, you're right, it's true.
Yeah, it's true, let's face it, it's true. And in the middle, you've got some people who might share, or who might share better, but they need a little push, because they might be a bit timid, or they might be really busy, and they can't actually point to a benefit because they might work a lot and write something, and other people benefit from that, but they can't directly show that the time they spent on it is going to really bring them something, unless you can build that reward into the community. So for public sector workers in online communities like this, whether it's internal or external or mixed, what are the motivations that you can, rewards that you can build into an online community? And this is not just for Michael, this is for everybody here. Michael, you start because you're big on the screen.
No, I mean, I suppose for me, it's just sometimes just a simple one, like the thank you from other people saying that was really useful, that really helped me, and that for a lot of people is, oh, actually someone's actually used something I've produced or something I've done, and in the past when I first started working in local government, I mean, there's some really good reports that went out, and you never had a name on them, which is always frustrating because I always wanted to ask questions of the people that produce some of these. How did that actually work in reality? And because people are now saying who they are and what they're doing, and I mean, when I first started working in local government, the idea of sharing didn't really exist. But then I used to be a best value officer, which was like sort of like seen as the nasty people who did service reviews in organisations. But after a while, everyone was like, well, actually, if someone's doing it better than us, maybe we should go and speak to them. Let's just see what we can learn from this. So the culture in some ways through those sort of best value and comprehensive performance assessment reviews actually broke down those boundaries that actually we can go and find out about other organisations how to do, because they had a benchmark. And a lot of people wanted to do that. And just now the ethos is, if we don't know, let's go and ask. Before, if we don't know, let's muddle through it. And realise that we haven't got the money to sit there and muddle through it and make mistakes.
That's the motivation to go onto the community and find stuff, but I'm looking for the motivation to get people to contribute stuff. And you said it.
Yeah,
one of the motivation is to give people. But one of the things is to just provide a mechanism by which other community members can signal their appreciation, to say thank you. Liz, you were going to say, is there any other rewards?
I agree with you, actually. That is a lot more difficult because I was just thinking through then whether I had an answer to this question. And actually, most of my answer was to do with understanding the benefit of the community. And actually, I always say you get out what you put in. So, you know, I've got 100 examples in my head, you know, thinking through of people we've spoken to where they've downloaded a document and it was really helpful because they adapted it and used it for their organisation and stuff like that. But that's exactly what you've just said. That is, you know, people going in and using stuff. That's not actually people recycling and giving back. And actually, that is beyond. That's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to get people to initiate and to put in, because actually we're quite a modest bunch, I think, in public service generally, and sometimes we don't even realise what we're doing is useful or interesting to someone else. So I think there is quite a big challenge there relating to, you know, just encouraging people that they might actually have the answer. And I think the community manager role is quite important here because, as I think Steve said earlier, you know, sometimes if you think you know somebody who could perhaps answer a question or, you know, just tease something out, then you kind of, sometimes you have to go to those people and say, you know, I think you've really got the answer here. And they might not have even realised that they did until you point that out. So I think, you know, it's a really good question because it's actually quite a challenge. I mean, I think there are ways kind of electronically that you can reward people with gamification and social equity and that kind of thing. But, you know, does that cater for the majority or the few, I wonder?
Okay, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. What about you, Stephen?
Well, I two things. Or start with two things. The thank you economy is really useful. So whether it be behind the scenes thank yous or thanking people for asking questions or thanking people for contributing, it makes people feel good and it creates a sense of reciprocity in the space.
Okay.
The other is having a more or less a 6-month window of coming to understand when payback comes. So one of the things that I really like about thriving online communities is when I see someone ask a question, it generates answers, and then I go, huh, I was going to ask that question in about 2 weeks, but I wasn't even there yet. Now I realize that. And in fact, now I can even add a follow-up question. And this is one of these things that when you create a learning community and people can see that they're advancing beyond where they were and then can add more, that can create a real engine of sharing. And if your forum, maybe sometimes your groups have slowed down a bit, maybe in terms of creating incentives, maybe trying to think about, well, maybe there's a topic or a question that would jumpstart. And the last thing I'll say is it often connects to face-to-face, or if you're doing more global work, video to video or voice to voice, building trust is key. But if we can leverage conferences, if you can leverage in-person connections, and then bring that online, that often can be a real boost to the community. And then what happens when they meet again in 6 months, whatever, someone says offline, I really like what you had to say. Oh, it's been really useful. I've gotten more feedback from my neighborhood online work at community picnics, sort of about the value of what the space is to them in person than I often have online.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree with you what you say about trust. I think that's a key element to any community, actually, and some of our most successful communities on Knowledge Hub are very much trusted professional environments. The people who are talking there trust the opinions of the other people who are there, and that's actually quite an important part of what we do in Knowledge Hub.
Okay, that brings me to another point. Thanks, great link, I hope. Anyway, thanks for all of that. This is one of the conditions required, right? Is trust. It's also one of the conditions required for good communication. So just to bring back to Liz's question about the audience of the EuroPCom conference, they are primarily communicators who may or may not have a participation project or a consultation that they need to communicate around, but they are primarily looking for communications tactics. And I think that one of the real benefits of the community approach, of integrating community into a communications program and vice versa, is that if you can get a community working, you are by definition, you've got a trusted environment, you've got and then therefore your own content, what the things you have to say as a communicator, are more likely to be taken on board because they're shared within an environment where you are actually trusted. And for public communicators, trust is a big problem because they're not being trusted. They're representing governments which aren't trusted, and this is really quite a large issue. So I think that touches back on that question about what does the online community approach, when executed well, offer public communicators. It helps you get in a trusted position with your audience, but it also means that you don't just communicate to them, you have to actually offer them something more than just, please read my brochure. It's got to be like, before we were talking about how do we motivate fellow public servants to get involved in the community, but what about if it's people on the outside? If you want to open a community up, you can create an open group. For example, on Knowledge Hub, you can create an open group. You can create groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, which are by definition open. And you want to bring in people from the outside so that one of the benefits of this community is to increase awareness of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and perhaps get some feedback. How do you increase the trust of people outside and reward them for joining and for contributing? Do you have any examples in Knowledge Hub from that?
Is the fostering community a good example of that engagement between multi-stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an open group, but
that's okay. Well, open in the sense that you qualify. I mean, if you're it's open in the sense that it's not anyone can join, but if you are involved with this issue, no matter the organization, you can come in.
Yeah.
What is it? What is the fostering community?
So it's the Fostering Information Exchange. It was sort of established by a set of partners, really. So it's the Department for Education in this country, and then a number of their partners. So the Fostering Network, which is an organisation for foster carers, a number of other fostering. So the Independent Foster Carer Association, those kind of things.
Okay, it's about fostering children who need somewhere to live.
Children.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's a key subject area. Now, the interesting thing about this particular community is that it was established by these set of partners to bring everything together in one place. The interesting thing about it is that each of these organisations actually have their own routes to their own users, their own sets of people. They have email comms, they have different communities, different discussions and bits and pieces going on elsewhere for their members and their different people. But actually what this community in the Knowledge Hub did was to bring all of those communities together in one place. And they'd never really had somewhere where they had this kind of one-stop sort of place where people like, you know, foster carers themselves, social workers, people in government departments, other people in perhaps local authorities who had an interest, you know, researchers, a whole load of different types of stakeholder were actually able to come together in one place. And actually that's what the Knowledge Hub enabled them to do, because it took them beyond the boundaries of just their normal comms channels and just their normal kind of ways of doing things. So it sort of crossed boundaries in that way.
Okay, this is one of the major benefits of it.
When you spoke.
But is it how open is it? We haven't actually defined our terms of what we mean by open and a restricted and internal.
Okay. So we have essentially three different types of group on the Knowledge Hub. We have an open group, which is open to anybody who registers on the Knowledge Hub, and anybody can register on the Knowledge Hub.
Right. So I can join and
completely free.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can, as an individual, it's completely free to register on the Knowledge Hub, and you can join and you can look around and you can start joining groups or requesting to join groups. An open group is open to anyone who's registered on the Knowledge Hub. You can just join. A restricted, we have a level called restricted. So restricted group is controlled by the people who own the group. So we have what we call facilitators, but other people might call group administrators or whatever, and they control access to restricted groups. But you can see restricted groups, you can search for them, you can find them, you can request to join them, but you can't participate or see any of the information unless somebody who owns that group enables you to join.
Why would you apply to join a group that you can see that it exists, but you can't see who's in it, you can't see any of the content? Yeah, you might be joining a dead zone.
Yeah, no, that's true. But you can actually also see on the activity page of that group that there has been some activity. So you can see that there's an activity stream. You can see that people are doing something in there, but you can't access that until you are a member. Mm-hmm. So that's a kind of midpoint, I suppose. What it enables you to do is to promote your group and to let people know about it quite easily, but it actually allows you sort of proper access controls on it as well. Okay. So then we also have a level of group which is completely private and completely hidden. It doesn't show up in searches, you can't find it. The only way you can actually join it is if you are invited by somebody who owns that group.
Okay, and that Illuminati class, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And for that level of privacy does actually require it. We do charge for that, but an open or a restricted group is free for the public sector. So
I think
that's what we're talking about. But what I would actually add to that is that as a group owner facilitator, you do have access to make certain parts of your group also public. So, for example, Matthew, with your public sector communications group, that's what we've done now. Yeah. You know, it's an open group, but it's also now there are elements that are available to be consumed publicly as well. You know, as part of that group.
By Google, for example,
or enable you to do that. Yeah.
Stephen, you wanted to develop
I was just going to say, Liz, this might be a good time to mention the current status of K-Hub. So it started in the LGA, we mentioned that, but we haven't described, you know, also then just sort of how if an intergovernmental group or a government group or whatever wanted to work with the Knowledge Hub, how would that work?
Okay, so it started very much rooted in local government in this country, in the Local Government Association.
Excuse me, Liz, can I turn this question to Michael, if you don't mind, because I didn't know up until a few minutes ago that Michael has actually been in the Knowledge Hub since the very beginning, and I find that, I mean, it's rare to find anybody who's been in one job, or not one job, in one organization for 10 years. And I mean, you must have seen online communities have evolved enormously in the last 10 years. So the LGA is a local governments association. You've already explained that we're having our budgets cut. It's pretty rare for an organization which is having its budget cut to actually invest in a website, because you know it's a new cost, you know, in fact. So anyway, how has it evolved over the last 10 years, and how big is it now? Give people a sense of how large the Knowledge Hub is.
Actually, it started originally. It's come out of a government knowledge management program back in 2004. And one of the concepts from that was community practice, and the company we work for was called the Improvement and Development Agency for Local Governments, as a precursor to the LGA. We actually got we were a sister organisation to the LGA, and we finished up becoming part of the LGA later on. And so from that knowledge management project, a knowledge management strategy for the IDA was developed to try and become a knowledge broker for the sector and allow the sector to share with each other. And then community practice come out of that, and we started on the original platform, was a Drupal platform. It failed terribly, but we knew that was going to happen. It was a test run. We also knew that the people that were going to run those probably wouldn't do very well.
Well, this is 10 years ago. Drupal was still very, very young, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And then from there, we actually went and developed our own platform, which was an IBM WebSphere platform called Community Practice for Local Government. And this was the same time when Twitter didn't exist, but Facebook was starting. And from there, it started off as very much an internal project. And as soon as local government people heard about it, we had to go wider. And it slowly developed and ramped up. And over time, we sort of grew and grew by. It was very much word of mouth, and then a bit later on we changed platforms to more of an open source one and kept growing. So now 110, 120,000 sort of members on there, about 1,800 groups on there.
When you say members, are you talking about like 110,000 people have once joined and then never went back, or how do you define a member?
There's someone that sort of like, well, we know on average around that sort of 30 to 40,000 people return each month. But then, so we've got 100,000 users on there, and we just did a big cull actually of members as well. So we've actually done a clean now. We're slowly cleaning out members, so we know that we've got more of an active base.
Right. So it's 110,000 after the clean. Okay. So you mentioned the big word. Oh, sorry, Liz. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to sort of so I just wanted to say that whilst we were very much originally rooted in local government, I think it's probably quite important to stress now that a couple of years ago we actually moved out of local government, and we've been at pains since then to kind of emphasise that this is very much about public service. So clearly we have quite a large local government user base, just over 50% is still from local government, which is amazing. We want to keep that, but also we want to grow into other areas. And I think this is behind some of the work that we're doing much more internationally with other areas of the world, which is, I guess, Matthew and Steve, while you've become involved as well, but also very much, down other areas of public service, so central government, health, not-for-profit organisations, education. We have quite a large growing education community as well. So I think, this is very much about anybody who is wanting to improve the way public services work, and that's very much how we've broadened out over the last couple of years.
Okay. Steve, I don't really want this video to be a hard sell about Knowledge Hub. That wasn't what it's for. So just let's come back and talk about our workshop in next month at EuroPCom. What have you picked up so far from this chat that we can integrate into our? Is there something we need to explore further in terms of best practices and ideas that we can work into the workshop so that people can come away from our workshop with, something concrete, something useful. They can. I'm not saying that what we're saying so far it hasn't been concrete and useful, but I mean, actionable insights into building their own community of practice. For example, the F word has been used a few times.
Facebook. Yeah.
And a lot of people say, why don't you set up a Facebook group for your community? And indeed, why not? Or LinkedIn. Why not? When is it appropriate? When is it not?
Right. So first, in terms of resources, I confirm this. If you Google K-Hub Facilitators Cookbook, you're going to get one of those deliverables, right? You're going to find the 7-pager, and one of the things that I'm trying to pull from this is what can I take from the conversation here, but also what can I take from the history of documentation and summarize it in some slides, but also then give people bookmarks or links to go deeper, right? So that's one of my goals, is to introduce and then make it clear that there's places to go. I have my own little notes here, so my final question is, why not just use Facebook or LinkedIn groups? So this is probably the million-dollar question, right? So if you're a public communicator, you're primarily using Facebook and Twitter to communicate with the public, why not? And so I was going to ask that of the group, but for the sake of time, maybe I'll help answer that myself. to say it depends upon the audience you're attempting to reach. And I actually run a 4,000 person Facebook group, right, on open government. And the reason I went with Facebook, after having done lots of different open source mailing lists and different types of online communities, was that I wanted to reach people in different countries that basically live on Facebook. And I wanted to open it up, and actually my goal was to try to get some elected official parts, like in Minneapolis, for example, where I'm based. But the problem with that is, if I have 4,000 people, when a group gets to a certain size, after over 100 people, they no longer give you metrics about who's viewing your posts. And I have another Facebook group that I'm doing with young people in St. Paul as part of my e-democracy hat on. I have close to 100 members, and right now it gives me stats. And so when I post, only 7 people actually see it. You know, and so when you go with a different platform where you no longer have control, and there's no export button, there's no detailed membership list, right? The things that are really important to a group organizer, if you will, is the ability to, if you ever decide you need to move, you have that ability. Or if you decide you want to craft, you want to turn on a wiki, you want to turn on these different features, or make it a richer experience. I call it slow food, social media, right? There's a slide there somewhere. And you know, and I'm on a lot of LinkedIn groups. I think actually, Matthew, we talked about this once before, but how sort of LinkedIn is where you go to get a job, and maybe Knowledge Hub, you know, is a place where you go to do your job, right? And while there's lots of
LinkedIn groups are LinkedIn groups. Let me take this game for a sec.
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I mean, I prefer. I mean, my preference is LinkedIn over Facebook generally. But I mean, LinkedIn groups can be pretty successful. There's no hint yet that LinkedIn is going to like throttle the organic reach of your posts within a LinkedIn group. You know, there's a bit of a hint that they may be doing that. You know, in the main thing. But I know what you're coming from, because I was doing a lot of work on LinkedIn for a project a few years ago, and a large chunk of the strategy of using LinkedIn was to use LinkedIn answers or questions or whatever it is. And then they just took it away. They just said, no, we're going to stop that now. We're not going to do LinkedIn questions anymore. And you're just totally at the mercy of these platforms. They can decide, oh, you're going to have to start advertising in order for your followers to see your content now, or we're going to take away that feature, or we're going to stop giving you metrics, which is actually really important, because what Michael said about half an hour ago, and we've been talking for an hour, by the way, so we should wrap up.
Finish it, yeah.
But what Michael said a while ago is that you've got to try things out and see whether they work. And if that doesn't work, then try something else. And if it does work, then you do it. But if you don't have metrics, well, you simply cannot do that, can you? What sort of metrics do you have on
Sorry,
cable?
I was just going to say, could I just say that I do completely agree that this is about the right tool for the right job. And you know, Facebook, fine. If you're a councillor, you know, an elected politician, and you need to engage with your local community, where are they all? They're probably on Facebook. So actually, you know, that's the right tool for the job. But you know, and you know, likewise, things like Twitter, things like LinkedIn, they all have a job to do. That's completely fine. And I think actually what you said, Steve, about this is where you go to do your job. Actually, in a lot of cases, Knowledge Hub is where people go to get something out of it for their everyday work, for their job. And so, you know, I would add that it is a kind of trusted, secure, professional environment, and that is, you know, what people use the Knowledge Hub for. Equally, you can use a number of different tools within a group. And so, again, it's about the right tool for the job. It's not going to suit everybody, but it is about finding the right thing for you in order to achieve a purpose. And I think, you know, that's quite an important point. In terms of metrics, you can add, so to an individual group, for example, you can add Google Analytics, so you can measure stuff like your visits to the group and all of those kind of things. On top of that, we do usually get sort of site reporting ourselves, so we can do some site reporting, and we can you know, support groups in providing information to them as well.
Okay.
But we are looking at actually developing the analytics side of things, hopefully, so that we'll have more things available to people.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Can I just come back on something there that you said? You were saying before that it's a place where you can do your work because it's a trusted environment, and trust is very important, whether it be communications, participation, or just an internal thing. But you've got three options, for example, in Knowledge Hub. You've got open, restricted, and hidden. Have you done any analyses of the relative, how many of the groups that you have? I think Michael said 1,700. Was it 17,000? I can't remember. A lot. Anyway, how many of these groups are open? How many are restricted? How many of them are private? And also, how many of the successful ones are open? How many of the success? Is there a correlation between openness and success, or being closed and success? If you see what I mean.
Well, the majority of them are restricted.
Right. So you have to apply to join, and you have to be let in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that probably backs up the idea of, the trusted environment and that sort of thing. Equally, I could put my finger on some groups that are completely open, some, in fact, that are completely public, but are very, very successful. So I think it depends on what the community is, where it's come from, who the people are, how willing they are to share, what it is they're sharing. Some people share quite sensitive information, therefore they do need something closed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Well, listen, we've been talking for an hour. Are there any other remarks or questions? Particularly, Steve, you're the one who's going to have to be putting this into a PowerPoint in about a month's time. So do you have any other particular questions?
Well, we mentioned the fostering community, and so maybe, and I've been gathering stories or examples, and so I just love to hear one or two examples of groups that have had an impact. Maybe there's a case study out there or two that would just sort of help people understand the value of a successful online group.
Yeah, so the key one that I always draw people's attention to is the Food Standards and Labelling Group. Now, I know that it probably doesn't sound that exciting to you and me, but it's a really well-used group. It's used regularly every day by a lot of people, and the reason for that is that it's around finding a consistency and a way of consistently applying a particular type of legislation. And enforcing legislation in a consistent way across the country.
And are the members only people working inside the government, or is it a mixed group with people from the outside as well?
It's
like business stakeholders?
So it's largely local authority practitioners. I think there are some central government people in there, but it is not open to private sector. So it is quite specific in that way.
Well, then, but let's try to find another example that's more appropriate to the EuroPCom audience, which are, after all, public communicators. So they'll be looking at coming to the workshop to talk about how communities can help them communicate to the public. It could be stakeholders, it could be the general public. Okay, if it's towards the general public, Facebook will probably be playing a part too, but there can still be a role for online communities. And when you get a more specialized audience, you tend to find online communities becoming more and more interesting. Do you have any quick examples that you can fire away? You or Michael, of course.
Of communicating with the public?
Well, of communities which include people in the public, which are not restricted just to internal public servants, but it could include stakeholders, citizens, people who care, communities of interest, people who care about
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the fostering group is potentially one of those. For example, there's a massive planning group that is completely open, but I think it's the sort of thing that is probably only of interest if you have a professional interest in planning. Now, not necessarily a public servant, but in fact, quite a lot of private planning consultants and various people like that get involved there as well. So
that's fine. Those are stakeholders.
Open.
They're stakeholders, and you need to communicate to them too.
Yeah.
Steve?
No, Michael, do you have an example or two that you'd like to toss on the table?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a very strong social media community as well. I mean, their stakeholders are the public, so they've been talking to each other about how they can communicate with the public and the best ways to do it and how they can engage with them. So that's been very sort of interesting, because it was actually one of our early communities that we kick-started, and I mean, we haven't talked about failure of some of the communities, but that one, unfortunately, the sort of lead facilitator has moved on. And it's taken us a long while to get someone to take it over again and get it kick-started. But Lady Stacey's done a really good job sort of getting it all back up and running, because some communities go back, But again, it's because there's people that are passionate about it. But it was a very strong community. I mean, community slowly come down, but we thought we'll try and keep it ticking over. We kept it ticking over for about a year and a half, and then with Stacey coming on board to it and taking sort of a lead on it, she's been able to get it re-engaged again. But that again is going back to the stakeholders, are the members of the public. Then we've got other ones as well, probably not the same sort of area, but we've got things like around sort of like local LACEF, local area chief enforcement forum. I wouldn't think bailiffs would talk so much, but they do.
But again, very specifically based in local government, particularly, and they are quite strict about their membership. So I think it reinforces the fact that quite a lot of the groups on here are, like I say, trusted professional environments, because that's what people require to do their job.
Well, this is about the fact that when you create a community, you convene your audience. You know, if you want to communicate to a specific audience, and you only want to communicate to that audience, then creating a useful community that will come to it is a way of creating an audience for you to communicate with, and that's actually that's worth talking about in October, Steve. It really is.
So one of the things that I did done this summer is I created a K-Hub showcase. So if you Googled K-Hub showcase, you'll see a number of groups that are either open or restricted, but open to a global audience. So the social media group is in there, and what's interesting about that group, that issue of a facilitator transition, it's a really, I mean, it's a second level discussion, but that's a really important one. But what she does is on a weekly or bi-weekly basis does a direct message, right? You know, and the ability to sort of proactively reach people. She shares some highlights, welcomes a new member, sort of very handcrafted, short note, and I think it's a real model, and that's excellent.
It is.
So I was going to make one other point. I can't recall. Oh, the showcase. So one of the things I'm actually right now in the process of doing is trying to create a process to recommend new groups. Now, clearly, if someone wants to start a new group and wants to do it to engage the public in some way, coming and say, hey, we want to do this, that's much, much easier than myself or K-Hub saying, let's create some groups to attract some new members. Yeah. But right now I'm circulating like 20 different ideas, trying to figure out like which 2 or 3 are so timely and important and of global interest. Whether they're open or restricted, we'll see, but they'll vary.
Managing refugees.
Well, I've mentioned that on some topics, and so I posted that to a group, and I'm interested in that one. And one of the issues there is, so where do we go as a lost leader, if you will, to sort of put some time in to show the platform off to other countries. So I'll be looking for ideas at EuroPCom about ideas for groups and/or people who would like to start groups. And the last thing I'll say is that what I'm really interested in here too is with the showcase idea, as well as a little global cluster of groups, is how can one group's existence and marketing benefit others? So how can we do more group marketing, if you will, to get them to new people? And that's one of I actually probably need to pick up tips from other communicators about what are ways that we could help introduce this to more people in public services in other countries. What kind of channels can I reach people through? Because ultimately, if you build it, they won't come unless you tell them it's there, unless they hear word of mouth, right? And so to hear about a lot of these groups, it's going to take some heavy lifting or some online advertising or different types of outreach. And so I'm, not going to be talking about that at the presentation, but I may leave a question at the end and sort of say, okay, and here's where I need some help, and then and see what kind of tips come back after the session.
I hope you get some, because I think you're right. I think that Knowledge Hub is an example of a group platform which was set up not at all for communicators, as far as I can work out. It's really set up to improve government efficiency, and delivery and so forth. And the people coming to EuroPCom, of course, they're communicators mainly, and they have to be introduced to the concept of, or some of them will have to be introduced to the concept of what online communities are and what they offer them, but how they will also challenge them as communicators, because it's more than just a communications project. But a good group which involves external stakeholders needs good communications to succeed. It needs good content, it needs good promotion, and so forth. Although it does say a lot. What Michael said about the whole way that K-Hub grew organically without requiring any promotion is quite interesting. But I think that as time goes on, there's just so many more distractions on your time that it's going to be harder and harder to get things started when you start a group. I think we should wrap up, because we've been talking for over an hour. At one point, I think we had 2 viewers at a time. We've had a couple of tweets, but it wasn't the purpose. It was just I just thought it would be interesting to share our discussions, our internal discussions externally, this YouTube video will be put in a post. And what I'd like you guys to do is all the things you've mentioned where there's a link to point to, could you chuck them in the wiki that we started on the group, and I'll incorporate those links into the blog post and get that up there in a few days' time. This has been fun. Are there any other comments or questions?
I was just going to go back to the idea about why use Facebook or why use LinkedIn. I did some research with Henry KM Forum a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And
there seemed to be a real sort of difference between people wanting to keep their work life and their personal life separate. So it was very much Facebook is your personal element or some of the sites, and then your work stuff would be maybe LinkedIn or a collaboration platform for your work. And they wanted to make sure that distinction between the two, I didn't want them to cross over. Where a consultant does that, but most people in the work that we were doing said that because they worked in the public sector, said they wanted to keep those distinct markers between those two. So these sort of communities do work in that way, that it is professional, it's networked. It means that you do your work, but your social side doesn't ever get involved in it. You keep that one separate, which I thought that was quite interesting. I think that's right. You don't want to always bring your own personal elements into your work, and you want to keep them separate.
I think that's very true. I think that really the real question is when to use LinkedIn, which is a professional tool, when to use a platform which is more focused on the public sector community groups such as Knowledge Hub, and when to build your own, because then you have complete freedom, but then your costs, are correspondingly much higher. But you have complete freedom. Okay, then this has been very good. Thank you very much, particularly to you, Liz and Michael, for sharing your thoughts. Do get those links into the wiki. Steve and I will be back on the group later on, I think, in the next few days, asking more follow-up questions, developing some of these things. And I'm going to try to pull in the other two speakers in the EuroPCom workshop that we're speaking to, Olivier Butterworth and Christelle. And they have got some very interesting things to talk about too, so I hope to bring them in at a later date, if they're available, of course. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you.
you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for organizing this.
No worries.
Bye-bye.
It's been good. Bye.